But one thing I'm interested in is, so I'll say this, Peter. I think I've shared this with you before. One reason early on I was drawn towards your work and then really pirate theology is because I realized your work doesn't call for any kind of like spiritual revelation or like I don't have to be saved. As you say, there's no A to B. A is not A itself, right? So, and I was like, yes, because I myself, I'm not a spiritual person. In fact, I joke around when I say I'm religious but not spiritual. But people say the other way around, right? So, and 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 I'm of two minds about this whole notion of spirituality. And I love the fact that Matt, you said that you're kind of ashamed of it because here's the thing, though, right? With these kinds of spiritual experiences, it can be just ethically speaking. For me, it's very ethically ambiguous. I'll put it this way. So you take someone like I don't know, a fascist. In some sense, fascism itself, I would argue, has this almost like fanatic spiritual element to it too. It's like to use Zizek's terms, I am a tool of the big other. There's like a perverse structure. In fact, recently, I'm not saying he's a fascist, but he's a neo-fascist, would say, Trump. He said when the bullet, hit him, he was like, I really felt like this was God telling me to go and do what I have to do. Like God gave me a second chance. Um, and I don't know if it's a show for him, but perhaps he genuinely just believed that this was like a sign from, Big Other to go and do what he has to do, like carry out his calling. And I've always been very skeptical of people that just have this strong conviction that my calling, people say my calling was to do this, and I hear this, from especially people in confessional Christianity. So just regards, yeah, spiritual experiences, I'm curious to hear, do you both think there is such a thing as an authentic spiritual experience? And like how, yeah, how people, because I've heard a lot of people share their spiritual experiences, like how in your view should one deal with this if they believe they've had a spiritual experience? Maybe we'll go with you, Matt, and then please, Peter.
Hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, you bringing up the example of fascists feeling inspired by some type of deep
Oh,
spiritual
yeah.
spiritual experience is interesting. I mean, you could just as easily, be an atheist, sort of historical materialist who's inspired, you know, to commit atrocities because of the end you think you're serving. I mean, so this doesn't necessarily um, it's not that only religious people are vulnerable to this type of um, overconfidence in a particular dispensation that they feel they've been given. But I'm also reminded of something, I think it was in Rahul, your conversation with Peter about a year ago, where Peter, you talked about the difference between left wing and right wing enjoyment, and where left wing enjoyment is coming to terms with the inescapable alienation of life and kind of just learning to accept the contradiction inherent in the nature of existence. Whereas right wing enjoyment is like, oh, this alienation could be overcome, and there must be somebody who's preventing me from overcoming it. And so let's find the scapegoats and eliminate them. Um, and I think that's obviously a danger here. And I think I don't think it's limited to just spirituality though. Any kind of ideological fixation or over certainty in one's sense of like what the solution, the final solution to the problem is going to be problematic. And if I were going to simply describe what an authentic spiritual experience would be, one of its characteristics, I think, would be humility, first of all, and a kind of ecstasis, like being outside oneself. And so if it's authentic, you should actually feel rather disoriented initially, um, not certain of anything, but you've you've become a mystery to yourself. Um, and that might that ontological shock might lead you to, after you know sort of shamanically dismembering you and leaving you in pieces, you might then pick up the pieces and reassemble yourself into something else. And depending on the context and your prior life experience, and yeah, like who's around you, like what are the easiest you know, influences ideologically that you're going to use to reconstruct a new sense of identity, like that could go in different directions. But the experience itself should be shattering, humbling, and bring you outside of yourself so that you're less certain about who you thought you were, right? And so, if uh, I guess I'm distinguishing here between authentic spiritual experience and a kind of conversion. Um, I didn't experience what happened to me at 19 as a conversion. I didn't start calling myself a Christian. I didn't start going to a particular church. I still don't go to a particular church. So for me, it's not so much, it wasn't a religious conversion. It was an encounter with a being that was as real as anything I've ever experienced. I didn't need a religious or institutional context for it. I didn't need to give myself a new label afterwards. But I grant that sometimes there are conversion experiences that seem very authentic because the person is totally different afterwards. But now they're fixated on, like, oh, this is the truth. Um, this is what's wrong with the world. Now I know, and I think um, that might be different than how I would want to define an authentic spiritual experience, which I think is initially not going to leave us with certainty. Um,
All
what do you
right, well,
think,
I jump
Peter?
in. Yeah, so I'll outline as quickly as possible. It might take me a few minutes to a possible structure for how I think about religious experience, which I think will touch on some of what you're saying. And in some respects, it's going to sound like the opposite, of course, and then we'll find out how to square that circle, or if we can. But yeah, in terms of um, the apophatic tradition, spiritual experience is a saturated phenomenon, a phenomenon of being overwhelmed by the over proximity of that which is otherwise than being. Right? Not dissimilar from Freud's early notion of trauma as a happening that cannot be symbolized. So it's a truth, an event that overwhelms you and you cannot symbolize it. You don't have the ability to symbolize it, and so it exists as a real, as a something that is unsymbolizable. So that's kind of broadly speaking the apophatic idea, and that's the kind of experience. And you mentioned psilocybin. Like you can like that, you can name, you can go, well, that happened on the 21st of June at 5 o'clock, right? It's something that happens in history at a particular time, at a place, you can note where it happened. I've had a few of those myself, so anyway. Then there's like the existential notion of religious experience. So in Paul Tillich, what's interesting for Paul Tillich is he basically, he says God is the ground of being, out of which everything arises. So his God is pre-subject object. So we are all marked by a loss. As we come out of the ground of being, we are marked by, again, using the Freud's thing of, like, separation from the mother. The separation marks you eternally with a loss. And so for Paul Tillich, religious experience is the experience of loss of desire, of ultimate concern. For the philosopher, it's truth, for the artist, it's beauty, for the activist, it's justice. But this is something that can never be got. Uh, the philosopher argues about truth, but in a sense, they're embedded in truth. So even though they can never define truth, the very argument itself testifies to what they do not have. So what I like about Paul Tillich is spiritual experience is not something that some individual has occasionally at a certain point. Spiritual experience is what everybody is having all the time. And therefore, the church is about, helping you embrace that experience of loss that marks us in our being and be driven towards ultimate concern, right? That's that. Now, then the position that I'm interested in is the position in which not that religious experience primarily is the encounter with a hyper presence that cannot be symbolized or experienced. Not simply that we are marked by a loss, and religious experience is really tarrying with that loss, realizing it, not closing it down into, as you were talking about, like into something that you can have, nation or whatever it is. It's a constant openness to the future, very Derridean. Um, but religious experience is a loss. So all of these have negativity, by the way. So the apophatic is a negativity that comes from hyperpresence, hypersaturation. So we desire not because of a lack, but because of a overwhelming experience. But there's still a negativity. There's something you can't grasp by being overwhelmed. Now, Freud later changed his theory of trauma to what basically makes something traumatic is the unknown, the question of the other's desire in what happens. What is traumatic is what does the other want from me? He calls the das Ding of the other, that some other doesn't just abuse me, but there's a look in their face, the enjoyment they're having that cannot be expressed, something traumatic about the unknown dimension of the other. That this is key to what I think religious experience is. But so you have the apophatic, you have Antillic negativity in a much more to core desire. We have desire. We have the proof of religious experience is the proof of desire. We are desirous, and desire exists because there is a lost object, and that's spiritual experience. But the radical position is not simple, not that God is hyper being, nor ground of being, but rather that negativity is in the heart of God itself. Negativity is in the absolute. So, and the difference is this is similar to Freud's drive theory, is in if desire is a sense of it being a bit depressed because you can never get what will satisfy you, then drive theory is enjoying the loss, and the loss as the reception, right? The loss is the thing you want. And so that's what earlier I mentioned the joke of Zizek, which is, not a funny, but the joke is in the logic, that, that I experience loss, alienation, darkness, and then I realize that that loss, alienation, and darkness is woven into the very fabric of the universe itself. And by identifying in a transitive way with the alienated Christ, with the crucified God, the castrated God, I that lack is forgiven, not paid, it's not filled. The nothing is rendered nothing. The lack is no longer an oppressive force. So in all of that, I want to say that very quickly, I know I'm sorry I'm taking time here, to very quickly define knowledge and belief. I want to define knowledge, and this connects with Kant a lot. Define knowledge is the one thing we know is that we do not know. Right. And I can't show my working out, so I'm just going to have to say it, everybody, believe me for a second. I'm probably not right, but let's pretend I am, right? That the one thing we can know is that there is a limit to our knowledge. Now, in the kind of Freudian Lacanian tradition, this is the idea of there's frustration, castration, privation. Frustration is the infant experiences they're hungry but they don't get food all the time, right? There's frustration. It's inherent. We experience frustration as an infant. Castration is when you realize that the other who feeds you is also lacking. And then privation is the encounter with lack at the heart of everything, right? There's a sense in which everything is castrated. So those are the three. Now, if we take that as knowledge, what do we know? Now, I'm not talking about knowledge in terms of conscious belief. I'm talking about subjective registration. We register in our being that there is lack. And that's evidenced in our language, where we can't say everything we want to say, and in our desire, which can never be fulfilled. Then belief, I would argue, is what covers over that knowledge. Belief is ideology. Belief is the blanket we put on to avoid a confrontation with knowledge. And one of the ways that works is disavowal. I know that astrology won't tell me who I should marry. Nevertheless, I consult the stars, right? So but nevertheless you believe. So that's how I would define knowledge and belief. And then for me, uh, what I call Church of the Contradiction, the radical church, it is a ritual that is designed to um, critique belief so as you encounter the knowledge that you know, so that you directly encounter lack. You directly tarry with it. You directly engage with it. So basically, I call it a communion of non-believers. It is what the church is, communion of non-believers, a social bond based upon um, the embrace of lack without the ideological cover of belief. And here's then, sorry, and with this I'll finish. Religious experience then for me is jouissance. It is when you hit the radical negativity, like with a little hammer, you hit the rail. The affect is jouissance, which in effect is an absolutely overwhelming experience, like being on psilocybin. It can be an absolutely anxiety producing and intense experience of the lack. And that's why I think a genuine religious experience cannot be neo-fascist or fascist in the sense of it is it is a direct confrontation with a fundamental alienation that is enjoyable.
I resonate with all of that. The term that comes to mind is kenosis, self-emptying. A genuine spiritual experience is self-emptying, right? And
Yes.
so I think that
Yeah, I mean,
inoculates it against
yes.
the fascist appropriation.
Yeah, and just on that, thank you. That's brilliant. To add one thing is because I lived in LA for many years, and religious experience in LA is very much seen as a really nice experience, something wonderful, something you want to invite, something amazing, something that you want to go up to the mountain, you want to do your ayahuasca retreat. It's something. Even if it's going to be difficult, you kind of want it. But I think the interesting thing about Christianity is the Christian experience is crucifixion. It's precisely affliction. It's precisely a type of radical suffering. And I think Simone Weil is brilliant on this. And I'm sure Simone Weil has some resonance. From listening to you, I was like, oh, I think
Yeah.
some of what you say reminds me of Weil, and I love Weil. But it's like you cannot want religious experience. For Simone Weil, it's like you can't want that because who wants crucifixion? Who wants affliction? Who wants to identify with Christ? And subjective destitution is what Lacan calls it. There's actually something that we consciously cannot want. We can't consciously want our own destruction, our own be derailment. We're condemned to freedom, as Sartre says. I love that thing. We don't want freedom. Freedom is horrific. But religious experience is when we hit the rail, and it's awful and amazing. And I don't think we can want it. I think I loved what you said about it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. It's scandalous. It's ridiculous. And for me, it is where we encounter the truth.